it will have no effect. But even if it's just so that my kids can see this, hello kids, in many years to come, I'm going to hop on here and register the fact that every second day, Donald Trump absolutely appalls me. And I'm not even going to give reasons. It's everything he says. It's everything about who he is. It's his conduct. It's his behavior. He's the most terrible person I know. He really is. He's not Hitler. He isn't killing 6 million people at this point in time, but he's Hitler-esque in the way he goes about business, and he loves the tyrants and so on. But I don't want to give examples, and I don't want to get into analysis. I just hate the guy. Just hate the guy. And not unreasonably, and I haven't got Trump derangement syndrome. I just hate the guy. And I've got good reasons for that, and I'm not even going to bother, because I don't have to justify myself, because I don't put these things up looking for viewers or whatever. Most of these little YouTube clips I do are just for me, and half of them have got no views, a lot of them have got 1 view, and plenty have got 2 views, and that's it, and I don't even bother. You know what, I wish I was on social media attracting conversation and being influential. I'm not. I'm pointless in this whole exercise, but I'm just impotently registering here. I'm here to register how appalled I am about everything that is Donald Trump. In a sense, if I was in America and and I've put my face up saying that, you wouldn't want to do that in Germany back in Hitler's time, but if I was in America and I got the sack, I'd just say, oh, so what? Yeah. Iran's leader said that a while ago. Donald Trump was making threats, I said Donald Trump isn't Hitler, and he's not. But gee, I saw something the other day. I see something every day that appalls me. Some Houthi rebels, he blew them up. But it was the delight that he took in blowing those people up. They've got mothers, the Houthi rebels, which leads on to the people in Iran. The big guy in Iran, he was getting threats from Donald Trump, and he said, "We don't care. Do what you want." That's great. It's almost like someone dropping an atom bomb on you, and the last thing you do is this. But that's what I'm here for. I just want it registered in the ether, with no one even watching, that I hate the guy. I feel like if there was I feel like if there was a resistance movement, I'd join it. But I probably won't do anything because I'm busy. Here's the funny thing. It's, if 5 years ago, someone told you that Donald Trump was going to do this, and do the other, and say this, and say this, and say the other. I think today's one is he's pulled $2 billion of federal funding that Harvard always gets, whatever that's about. That, plus all the other things he says and does. I don't want to go into examples. I don't have to justify myself. I hate the guy. I'm in a post-analysis space. Like someone say, let's analyse what he said. Let's analyse. Like you're not reading him properly. Yeah, I am. He's an asshole. People say, oh no, but you've got to listen to his whole. Like if he speaks for an hour, you've got to listen to the whole thing, and you'll get what he's talking about. No, I know what he's talking about. He's joking his way to autocracy. That sort of thing, He's making little side comments and stuff. Like, oh, maybe I will, maybe I don't. And people say, oh yeah, or he's putting 145% tariffs or something on China, and he's doing radical things. That's what Hitler used to reward people under him for doing, being radical. So he's doing radical things, and people saying, "Oh, look, this is just his way of making a deal." Yeah, that's how to read Trump. Don't take all that too seriously. And half of it's theatre anyway, and half of it's comedy, and half of it's just him throwing out ideas and probably overstepping the mark in the way he speaks, because he can't help himself and all that sort of stuff. No. Yeah, that's what people tell me. That's how to read Trump. If you want to, you gotta listen to him carefully, and don't worry about all the wishy-washy stuff and the little jokes he's throwing in and all that sort of stuff. Don't worry about all that. Concentrate, they say. Concentrate on where, he's trying to set up a deal, for example. Now, he's not actually, what he's doing with Harvard there, he's pulling the $2 billion funding, but he wants to give it back. He's just setting it up so that, that they change their policies. But there's the problem, It's the change the policies bit that's the problem. And it's also the way he goes about what he's trying to do. It doesn't matter what his goals are. His methods are just going to wreck everything. Wreck. He's doing his best to wreck everything. People say, "Oh, America was already wrecked." No, it wasn't actually. It was all right. The Western world was a mess, but I've studied enough history to know that the world's always been a mess. We've probably been living in the best time ever, and even despite the very terrible wars, like in Gaza and Ethiopia recently, and Ukraine and all that sort of stuff. But this isn't Operation Barbarossa levels of Hitler going into the Soviet Union or anything like that, and millions of people getting killed in the first week. The world was going all right, and if you're watching this from Ukraine or Gaza, you might think this is a terrible thing to say, but it just was, and Donald Trump's declared the world a disaster zone and declared an emergency, and if he declares something an emergency, he can do anything he wants, and that's what he's doing. And he's a very, 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 very bad person. And the way to read everything is to take all these jokes seriously. Look, I'm actually at fault. In his first term, and these last 8 years or whatever that I've been watching him, I've laughed along a lot. I thought, oh, this guy, he's a buffoon, but he's good for comedy and he's funny. But this term, he's sobered me up, and I've sort of said, oh God, I shouldn't have been laughing at all those jokes. When he was laughing about, I'm going to take Greenland, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to make Canada the 51st state. There's people who tell me, oh, you're reading him wrong. This is what people tell me. They're reading him wrong. You listen to all those little asides, and you've got to take those. It turns out they were all serious. I think he said something about, at one stage, we're going to root out all the communists. He doesn't really mean, root out all the communists like Hitler was rooting out. Yes, he would, I think. It's not a joke. The way to read Donald Trump is don't laugh at any of his jokes. What his jokes mean, if he says something, he says, maybe I'll pull, funding for universities worldwide. Maybe I won't. I haven't really thought about it. You got to listen. That's the bit. You got to listen to that bit and say, right, that's policy. That's what he plans to do. And that's the way to read Donald Trump. Everyone, a lot of people have been reading. He used to do those rallies, and 90% of it was theatre. It was comedy, and he was making all these little jokes, and people say, hey, listen to the totality of the rally, of everything he said at the rally, and you'll get an idea. And listen, and you'll see where he's going. The whole thing might be he's just trying to get into power, or he's just trying to, he's just trying to win the election so that he can get some things done. Don't take little thing he says seriously. Yes, take every little aside, joke, offhand comment, wink and a nod, everything he does, all those little things, take them seriously and don't laugh. He meant them all. And America, he's destroying it. And as a human being, he's an arsehole. America wasn't that bad, and he's going to turn it into something very, very bad. That's what he's in the middle of doing right now. I have no idea where that's going to go. It's either the thin end of the wedge, where the people who come after him will be worse than him, which is what happened in ancient Rome. You get the Gracchi brothers and all that sort of stuff, and then it builds and builds and builds and builds, dictator after dictator, and each dictator gets a little bit worse, and you get one dictator that's pretty good, and he tries to get back to the values. That was Sulla, back in ancient Rome, and maybe Donald Trump, and someone after Donald Trump will come along as a real, who's actually talented in military terms, something Donald Trump isn't, and he starts throwing the army around, and people start getting killed, and Donald Trump has collected all these powers into the person of the president, and now this next person who takes over after Donald Trump gets to use all those powers and do very bad things. And then there might be another president later who's a good guy, but he's still a dictator, because you have to be now, because America's stuffed. Everything's an emergency all the time. So the next one might be a Sulla sort of guy, or a George Washington sort of guy, who puts himself in for such time, just 2 terms. Gets everything back on track, gets all the old American values back on track and all that sort of stuff, and then retires to his orchard, Cincinnatus style in Rome, or George Washington style, do the right things like that, or Sulla. And then everyone begs him to come back for one more term, but he didn't want to. This didn't want to is a very important thing. It's a little bit like sort of being a dictator, or taking on dictatorial powers, even if you're not an official dictator at this point in time. It's this business of being reluctant in doing that. And Donald Trump hasn't got that, Like when Sulla was pulled back into the job, he was dragged back reluctantly. No, I left Rome in good shape, and but they said, we still need you. And he says, oh yeah, but no, I don't want to ruin the the thing, where you can only be consul, you can only be dictator until the emergency goes away, or something like that. Sulla was saying that. I don't really want to be dominant. I'm putting Rome before me. Whereas, and I think George Washington was also begged like that. And I think Cincinnatus was too. But Donald Trump's different. He derives pleasure out of dominating other human beings. He's an asshole. He loves it. If he's in a room, he likes to dominate. And that could be via joking around. He likes to dominate in that way, or by straight attacking. So be careful in a sense. You're getting dominated, even if he's laughing with you, because the key is the relationship in that room. It's like when he's in one of those party rooms, his cabinet and whatever, there's joking all around the table, but the key is he's the big guy. It's all about everyone's laughing along, but the rule is it has to be done. You have to do it as a sycophant. They're appalling. All the people around Trump, just like the people who were around Hitler, were appalling. But if there was a resistance movement against Trump, I'd join it. As readily as if I was from Czechoslovakia back before World War II. And there was a resistance movement against the Nazis, I'd join that too. There was, some Czechoslovaks. Look, these days it's 2 different countries, Czechia Czechia and Slovakia, but there was some over in London during the war, and Hitler had his main man in Prague, in Czechia, and these guys were heroes, and the British flew these guys over and dropped them in a paddock outside Prague, and the guys snuck in to Prague and shot Hitler's governor. Well, it wasn't called a governor, but whatever the Nazi term for the local governor was, because Czechoslovakia was Nazi occupied at the time. But this is where you could get to. But I would join a resistance group. I should start one, but I'm not an influencer. Like I said, I put these things on YouTube mainly, so that my kids will at least know that I was against him. And I'm talking Trump, hate the guy. And I'm in a post-analysis state of mind. I'm not into analysing everything he said. This is what I've been doing that all these years, I've been getting into dialectics, with people. Let's all just, get all very Plato, put our togas on and have a dialectic and argue, the pros and cons of Trumpism and all that sort of stuff. No, is probably for the first time ever. And I guess, I hope I would have been like that when Hitler came along in the 30s, who was a great guy in the 30s, if you weren't a Jew, but, you have to put yourself back in the times. That was a golden age for a lot of Germans, the 1930s. Golden age. Autobahns, Volkswagens, everything. Anyway, but if I was influential, I'm just not. I would start a resistance movement. But where I sit, really, at the moment is I'm a bit feeling strange, There's a lot of, that feeling when babies come along. When my babies came along, it was weird, You sort of thought, how is everybody going about? And it doesn't have to be your own baby. It can be a nephew or niece, I was freaked out when my first niece came along before I had children. That was a huge thing. I was thinking, far out, this is magic. And the world looks weird. And you can hardly believe that people are just going about their ordinary business, going to get a coffee, or, you looked on the freeway and there's just cars in ordinary traffic and they're probably listening to their breakfast radio and all that sort of stuff. You think, hang on, everything just changed. I've just had a baby. Not this backyard, but another backyard in the previous house, where the first girl was born. I just looked up at the stars, and it was Orion, the constellation of Orion was right over there, and I just looked at it and I went, wow, that's amazing. To a certain extent, just watching that, just looking at that constellation was the only way. Everything else was just too ordinary, and it was just amazing. And it's like that when people die too. When someone you love dies, you get this strange sort of feeling, when you come out of the hospital or whatever. And I've had a lot of people who I have loved die. And cars are just going down the street and people are walking around and everything's just normal, and it's a weird feeling. How does everyone just go about their business as if nothing's happening? And whilst the phenomenon that is Donald Trump is not on the same level as having a baby or having someone you love die, I'm getting that strange feeling. Probably on average, every second day, I like to check the news every morning. I don't apologise for that. And the news, and I Google Trump just to see what's next. Not because I want to be appalled or because I've got Trump derangement syndrome. I haven't. I'm just an ordinary person who's just watching. I've got no derangement syndrome. I'm as normal as they come. Hate the guy. No derangement syndrome. Hate the guy. And I see the next appalling thing every time I check the news. Absolutely appalling, everything he's done, and I don't even care if it's all just Donald Trump doing these appalling things, Machiavellian style, because this is preemptive to a deal that he's trying to lock in, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter. This time the method is causing the destruction. Let's say he wants to make America rich again or great again, whatever he means by that. Goering once said of Hitler, because Goering was a bit put off by Hitler. He sort of thought Hitler went too far on one occasion there, and he was a bit, hang on, Hitler's going a bit far here. But then he went to one of his rallies and he said, I get it. He's a simpleton. That's what Dr. Goering said of Hitler, believe it or not. He's a simpleton and he's great, is how Goering put it. And he was right. Hitler was a simpleton. And he was great. He'd lay out his vision. He only had about 3 things. One, we need a Jewish solution. We need a solution to the Jewish problem. Another one was, Germans need more living space. And we need, the morality goes out of it. When you say it's an absolute necessity, Donald Trump says that a lot too. It's an absolute necessity. It's not about right or wrong. It's just an absolute necessity. Right and wrong don't come. See, right and wrong don't come into it if something's an absolute necessity or an emergency. So what do? You just call everything an absolute necessity and you call everything an emergency, and that's what Donald Trump's doing. But Goering, he says, I get it. He's got somewhere he wants to go, Hitler. And something for Germany. There's only really 3 things that I can think of that Hitler was into. Blaming the Jews and solving the Jewish problem, blaming the Jews for all Germany's ills at the time, restoring Germany's pride, making Germany great again after the thing that was a humiliation of Germany after World War One. He wanted that atoned for, and the other thing is just what he called living space. Germans need. As a matter of a sense, necessity, living space. Germany needs living space. And what he meant by that, he calculated that he couldn't do that across to the west, really. And he had this racial thing going on anyway, and the French and the English and everything, they're pretty German anyway. So he was thinking, the Slavs, that can be my Raj. That can be my, what Britain's done to India, I'll do to the Soviet Union, to the steppes, to the Slav lands. And the Slavs will be, we're the master race. The Slavs are the slave race, basically. And he said, we'll teach them to read, but only enough to read road signs. And we'll and it's going to be beautiful, he said. I've already got plans, he said. I'm going to put autobahns right across the steppes. That was his plan, all the way across to the Urals, maybe even further. I'll put autobahns everywhere, and every time an autobahn flies over a river, there I will build a gleaming city, and the Germans will be the master race, and the Slavs will be the serfs. And we'll treat, and we're not going to develop the steppes. That can just be our resource base. We don't want them to get up. We just want that to be permanent. That was Hitler's plan. But with Donald Trump, yeah, he's only got a few simple ideas, and everything falls into place around those 3 or 4 ideas: make America great again and a few other things. But the point is, Hitler pulled Germany down. He got rid of all the institutions. He became the law. He became president and prime minister, chancellor, So the analogy there would be someone in Congress in America rising up, a Hitler type person, and becoming president as well. But you can do it in reverse. So Donald Trump's already the president. So it was Hindenburg was the president, and Hitler took his job as soon as he died. But Hitler was chancellor, so now he was chancellor and president. So that's like Donald Trump becoming Congress and president, a little bit like Julius Caesar was doing. He was being senator and dictator. He was dominating the Senate, and that's why he got stabbed. And he was being a king, and that's what Donald Trump is being. He's being a king. There's no two ways around it. He's being a king. And just like in Rome, just the word king used to, they had a visceral reaction, the Romans, to anyone wanting to be a king. The idea is not wanting to be a king. The idea is not wanting to dominate another person. Donald Trump loves dominating another person. That's what he gets off on it. He's an asshole. Now, and then Hitler during World War II finally got control of the law too and became the law. He got in charge of hiring and firing lawyers and judges. So he became all 3 legs of the stool. He became the ultimate dictator. And Donald Trump and Hitler took the institutions over to the media and all that sort of stuff. All right, so Donald Trump is doing that too, 100%. He's attacking the judiciary all the time. He's nobbling the Congress in every little thing he says and does. Right now he can declare a war because presidents can these days. America took the guardrails off on that score long ago, and it just turns out they haven't had an arsehole like this as president all these years. I suppose it's an accident waiting to happen, that they haven't had a president who'd even want to take advantage of the fact that the guardrails are off and start turning himself into a king. Well, the answer is Donald Trump, because he's an arsehole. Someone like him he was bound to come along. They shouldn't have taken the guardrails off years ago. But the point is, someone that doesn't absolve Donald Trump of responsibility for being an arsehole. He's an arsehole. Look, he's not that responsible because he's a simple man, like Donald Trump, like Hitler. Hitler is like Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is like Hitler. But Goering, he said of Hitler, he got him. He understood him. He said he's simple and he's great. And in short, that makes him a genius. And Donald Trump is that too, a simpleton genius. He's simple, he's great, he's a genius. As a simpleton. It gives you a bit of a feel for how the absolute ridiculous can happen in Germany in the 1930s. We look back in the 1930s and say, how could people just get around normally? It's like the way people were getting around normally when I had babies. How can you just be driving to work like normal? My baby's been born, or someone I love, my grandmother or my other grandmother or my grandfather or my other grandfather's died, and you're all just acting like everything's normal. To a certain extent, the world's a bit like that now, and there might even be a bit of Trump fatigue setting in, but we're seeing the most ridiculous, appalling things. We're every day, every second day, and we're all just getting along as per normal, really, to a large extent, and there's not that much resistance. It's amazing. You'd think the whole world could gang up, wouldn't you? And maybe fly someone in like that, like the Brits did over Prague. Anyway, so I'm in that weird sort of situation at the moment that I can't I'm amazed that this is all even happening. It's the weirdest time. And God knows where it's going. It could be the thin end of the wedge, and we could have, a succession of dictators. Now, I don't think Donald Trump's the main guy. He's just the guy that that gets rid of all the institutions and takes all the whatever guardrails were left in America on their system, on their republic, whatever guardrails were left. He's just dismantling all of them mighty quick, whether they be universities, the judiciary, Congress, the media, all that sort of stuff, What did he do just the other day? It was 60 Minutes, I think I mentioned, I might not have, and where he said, maximum punishment, they must suffer maximum punishment. I can't remember the words he used, but the point is, when Hitler said something like that, Hitler tended not to talk about the Jews. He wasn't very prescriptive about what should happen to Jews. He just said, this has to be solved, and he'd rant about it. And then the people under him, the sycophants or whatever, the true believers, sycophants, they were the geniuses. Hitler was a simpleton. They were the geniuses, and they believed in the few, what I would call bad things that Hitler believed in, but they were geniuses below him. They were effective, German efficiency. And then they built industrial gassing systems to gas all the Jews. And there are people who say Hitler didn't actually build those things. We're not even sure he was aware that was happening. But the point is, all he has to do is say, all Hitler has to do in a situation like that, say, this is what I want to happen. This is my vision. It has to happen. The people under him, they're his machine. They're all working towards him as sycophants and as true believers, and they'll get it done. So he's responsible for what he says. Hitler himself pushed all those Jews into the gas chambers, even though I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't even know that some of them had even been built. He wouldn't have been keeping tabs. He wouldn't have been doing visits. But Donald Trump, all he has to say now is 60 Minutes must go. It needs to suffer maximum punishment. They're traitors to America, by which he means to him and his political correctness. He did a tweet. They all look the same, capitals and everything. But what he's doing a Hitler. And he's saying that institution has to go, because 60 Minutes is an institution. What is this term mainstream media anyway? They're not all a single monolith. The BBC is not the same as Fox News, and it's not the same as the ABC here in Australia, and it's not the same as Sky News. What's that even mean? The term mainstream media has no meaning. It's stupid. It's just institutions all over the place, and there's even non-mainstream media people. What's his name? Rogan. He's an institution now. He's an institution, so he's mainstream media too then. But all Donald Trump did, I think it was just yesterday, was just call for 60 Minutes to be wiped out. Now, if someone does something radical, and Hitler used to reward people who were radical and would do the opposite to people who weren't, in response to his wishes. Hitler, if you had one person, a governor of one area, who imprisoned all the Jews in his area, and another one who slaughtered them all, he would be furious at the first person and tell everybody what a great guy the other guy was. And very quickly, everyone who wasn't of a mind to slaughter every Jew in sight, natural selection wise, gets filtered out, and suddenly you've got everyone slaughtering Jews. Now, Donald Trump's doing the same thing. Anyone under him knows the rules. If Donald Trump says he needs something to happen, do it radically. Be radical. There will be people right now in the Trump machine thinking, there'll be legal people in the Trump machine thinking, how can we wipe out 60 Minutes? If 60 Minutes was federally funded, that'd be pulled already, and the program will be wiped out already. But, and this is the dangerous thing, the people under him would be thinking some pretty dramatic things as to what should happen to the people in charge in 60 Minutes, who did a program, I think, a week ago or whatever, that smashed Trump. And I don't think they would be thinking that prison, or worse, and I'm talking the people under Trump here, I don't think they would be thinking that would be that outrageous if something like that should happen to traitors like that.